Hello everyone, and welcome to another one of our Avatar Bible studies. Today we are in episode 6 of book 2, and it's been such a long time coming. I've been looking forward to introducing this character with you all, and I want you all to join me in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 26. We'll be discussing, of course, none other than Toph, the blind bandit. Book 2, episode 6, if you're keeping track at home. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26 reads as follows, "For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of this world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of this world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised God has chosen. And the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence." Glory will be the key word for today's study, and also noting a very particular trait and theme, the blind is also going to be important in today's study as far as a biblical application of Toph's introduction. Blindness in the Bible is a very common handicap that God not only deals with, but even deals through. In the Middle East, it was essentially a death sentence, committing you to a life of poverty and begging. You couldn't work on a farm, you couldn't gather water, and you couldn't enlist in the military. It even began to be seen and treated as a sign that God had cursed you for something that you had done wrong, because, and this is kind of a parenthetical answer to that objection, bad things just don't happen in a fallen world, right? Sarcasm aside. There was an example of a man during the time of Jesus who was born blind. I mean, it's one thing to be injured that rendered you blind, or to be struck blind through some extraneous circumstance. But to be born blind, this only further confused people, because they had the working assumption that bad things just didn't happen in a world separated from the source of everything good and perfect. Probably should have thought that one through. But was also noting this, remember, the handicap was assumed to be a curse from God. And when the followers of Jesus asked him, what's the deal with this guy that was born blind? Because, I mean, he'd be the one to ask. You know everything, so what about this? And Jesus not only was asked that question, but it's also going to include for us an answer that will directly apply to, in my opinion, undoubtedly the best character in Avatar. And I mean that in both series, by the way. In the Gospel of John, chapter 9 and verse 1, Jesus passed by and he saw a man who was born blind from birth. Or who was blind from birth, born blind from birth. That's kind of redundant. Anyway, his disciples asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned?" Note the assumption. "This man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned." Notice he's not calling them sinless. He's noting in regards to the blindness, that wasn't the cause. "But that the works of God should be revealed in him." Jesus debunks the entire assumption that this man's handicap was a curse from God. In fact, just the opposite. It became an opportunity to show just how awesome God is. And in today's episode, we saw the exact same thing. Toph was seen, ironically, as tiny, helpless, and fragile. The reality was that she was the living example of what an earthbender really was. And with the prophecy of Boomy in mind, we're going to find out the kind of person God can bless this world through the most. And ironically, with Toph in view, let's start with the first point. The virtues of an earthbender are defined, and we'll go more into this when we get to Toph's training sessions, but the wisdom that is found in those who wait and listen. Aang was smart in his choice of teachers, not just because he regarded Boomy's recommendation as something worth trusting, but he wouldn't settle for anything less than the absolute best. And when Boomy told him exactly what kind of teacher to look for, he affirmed the same virtues that make up the character of someone with the right relationship with God. So note the earthbending qualities here. God's called us all to be that in some capacity. But note, power with patience is, I think, the best key to understand all of this. It's a beautiful thing, and for only one reason. One reason, one alone. It's like God. If you want to become more like anyone, and this is further affirmed in the passage that we started with, bad company corrupts good character, but the inverse is also true. Good character, or good company, produces good character. And if you want to become more like anyone, you should probably go right to the top. Don't settle for, I want to be like this good person, or this person is someone I want to emulate. Well, you can do that all well and good, but you're seeing someone in them. I want to be more like the person that I'm seeing in the whole picture, which is the whole point. We're meant to be Christ-like, the definition and standard of everything good. And the Apostle James described that in action in his letter, chapter 1, verses 19 through 20. So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce. Notice the goal is what is ultimately done to you. It does not produce the righteousness, having a right relationship with God. So quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath, slow to get angry. Now note, doesn't mean that we don't use the emotion of anger. Other books say, for example, like Ephesians note, be angry and do not sin. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath, but give place to basically God to cover your defense. And that's really the whole key and point. These emotions aren't a problem. It's the misuse of them that's the issue. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So the wisdom behind that is use proportionately. That's how it was explained to me by a drill sergeant, ironically enough. Now, when we're talking about this issue of the wisdom of those who wait and listen, the values of an earthbender, and what Aang was supposed to look for, we can undoubtedly apply that to Jesus, but there's still one key feature that we're missing here as far as what made Toph unique. There are plenty of earthbenders around. In fact, one might look to someone like Master Yu as an ideal teacher. He had experience. Or someone would look to the boulder to go for the example, what you would one day hope to be like. But understand, the advantage of the blind is that they know that they're helpless, interestingly enough, in that regard. And while the boulder could glory in his talent, but more specifically his muscles, Master Yu in his reputation, and even Lao, Toph's father, in his wealth, Toph surpassed them all as an earthbender as well as an overall human being. How? Her handicap enabled her, from a biblical paradigm, to, ironically again, see what was most important. Glory means weight or value. Said that was going to be the key word. Now we have the definition. Something that is glorious, we're seeing it as, weighty. When you would measure the worth of something, you would do it in scales. The more an object weighed, the more it was worth in the measurement of the coins. So if I consider God glorious, I'm considering him weighty. I'm considering him worth something. Maybe my time, maybe my attention, maybe my priorities in life. But note, if I, on the other hand, take something for granted and I say, "Oh yeah, God's a part of my life, but I have things to do right now. He can kind of just sit in the secondary position, and I'll let me live my life now, and then when I get to heaven, he'll become a priority." Well, here's the thing. The more I take something for granted, the more I assume it's always going to be there, or presume that it's owed to me, the less valuable it will become in your eyes. Now note, in your eyes, not because your opinion of something changes its worth or value. God remains glorious whether we treat him as such or not. But understand that in the, Toph's advantage in noting not only what was expected of her, but making her the very essence of what it means to be an earthbender, it all fell down to her losing something that they all had, and yet gaining something that they all needed. The boulder wasn't someone who waited and listened, otherwise he wouldn't have had that unfortunate accident in the arena. You wasn't someone who waited and listened. He was someone who didn't wait. He instructed. He was the one at the front. He was the one who was giving the orders, not waiting for opportunities to teach. And interestingly enough as well, when it comes down to Toph, we can't even really say she knew earthbending. She was what an earthbender is. Now, how did she become the opposite, much like the man born blind, of what everyone expected them to be? Again, the same way the man born blind, later on in the chapter, who, and this is kind of amusing, he literally threw every religious expectation Israel had of him on its head. Just like with Toph. Oh, she's tiny, she's fragile, she's helpless. You want to try that again, because nothing could be further from the truth. Yes, she is tiny, but don't tell her that. The interesting thing is, just like with the man born blind, they ultimately came to the conclusion of accusing him of being born condemned by God, false assumption, and a traitor to his country. And notice why. For not outright condemning Jesus. For doing what? For healing him. That's the only thing that they could level. And interestingly enough, he came to the following conclusion, that these religious scholars and experts, much like the earthbenders in the arena, were unwilling to, notice not incapable of, but unwilling to understand. There's no one so blind as those who cannot see, or those who will not see. In the same chapter, John chapter 9 and verse 35, Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And when he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, this is the blind man, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him," the man born blind sees him, "and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment," conclusions, "I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may be made blind." Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" Jesus said to him, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, 'We see,' and your sin remains." What was the point that he was making there? Well, much like with Toph and her skills, there's no other way to put it, as an earthbender, it totally paled in comparison to, obviously, what Avatar Aang will be at the end of this series. But when you compare her to, for example, the skills of the boulder and the skills of the, other members of that arena group that would be over 4 times her size in physical prowess, they were utterly incapable of holding their own against her in an earthbending bout. Why? Because there was something else to her. She didn't know earthbending, she was earthbending. And we got some metal bending stuff coming up in the near future, but the point being, not too near future, but still nonetheless exciting. When we're talking about this issue, we're clarifying the point that Jesus made. They didn't see who he was, but this man who was born blind saw who Jesus was. It's not that they were incapable, it's that they were unwilling. And he points out in direct correlation with their blindness, not physically, but spiritually. They can't see me for who I am because they won't see me for who I am. If you say "we see" and yet aren't looking at the thing right in front of you, you may as well be blind. On the other hand, this blind man who hasn't seen at any time at all in his life ever was healed by Jesus, and the first thing he does with that information is, "I see that you are who you say you are." And he came to the right conclusion. Well, note, when Toph couldn't see, what did she ultimately accomplish? A better capacity for sight and skill in earthbending than people who weren't blind. On the other hand, these big, huge macho men and all their talents and so forth, it ultimately amounted to nothing because they missed what it meant to be an earthbender. This man in Israel, who they deemed cursed by God, got the one thing right that will make all the difference in eternity. And yet these people who knew the Bible better than you, me, and everyone else in this world combined, yet they missed that one point. This is the point that Jesus was making. and what ties us into our final point. What is the true power of the weak? Like our introductory verse pointed out, the glory or the value and weight of God is most clearly seen when it's coming from a place that gives us no other possible explanation. Why was Toph able to take down the best earthbenders in the kingdom, all of which were 4 times her size? Because she's just that awesome. There's no other way to put it. Likewise, how is God able to use people like us to bless people in ways that only He can? Because He's just that awesome. That's glory. That's seeing God for who He is, not coming up with alternative explanations, not dismissing Him or saying that, well, I was a part of that process too, It's like, me writing out these notes in the paper saying, well, I contributed too. Well, ultimately comes down to it, that's what the Christian life is meant to prove. Not how well we see, but that how God can even use the blind to show people the way to life. Not how smart we are, but how true His word is. And not how nice we can be, but how good He always is. And I'll finish with this, 1 Corinthians 10:31. Therefore, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all for the glory of God. Show how weighty He is. Show how awesome He is. Because, especially coming from little toffs like us, the explanation isn't us. If you got a bunch of the boulders walking around and showing just how strong Christian lives they're living, well, that might give the world an explanation. But when you look at Toph and you see the best earthbender who's ever lived, something else going on here. And that's the point. That's what people should walk away with. Thank you for your time and listening to this study. If you have any sincere questions, ask them. If you'd like to encourage the ministry, do so. But most importantly, if you know someone who would perhaps benefit from these insights into today's episode, please share it with them. Thank you for your time. Remember that Jesus loves you and that He has given us the opportunity in this life to glorify Him, to show how awesome He is. And like Toph, we have the opportunity every day just by being who we are, or more specifically, who He has made us to be. God bless you, and I'll look forward to seeing you all again next time.